Now I'm recording this for later because I don't have any signal to do Facebook Live, but this is the entrance to what they now call Gap Cave, and from what I understand, it was originally called the Gap Cave. And when I was a little boy, it was called Cudjoe's Cave. And that name came from a book that was written called Cudjoe's Cave. And James T. Trowbridge wrote that book, and it was Civil War fiction, as it says here. And two escaped slaves, Cudjoe and Pomp, had a secret hideout in a Cumberland grotto. He never came here. He didn't associate it with this cave, but he claimed that there was a secret hideout in the fictional book. And so at some time, because of the popularity of the book, they called it Cudjoe's Cave, linking it to the 1864 type of book. It originally, if you look here, it was called, this area that now is called Cumberland Gap. Dr. Thomas Walker called it the Cave Gap. And it talks about the large spring and the small entrance to a large cave and constant stream of cool air. You are not sorry if you've been walking and hiking and you come here, because it's probably 30 or 40 degrees different on some days. It's in the low 70s today, and I'd say it's probably 50 degrees, 54 degrees here, like most caves are. I got to tell you a story, and I'm going to back out here so I can tell you my experience as a little boy, because when I was about 10 years old, and my brother Mike would have then been about 7, and my cousin Vicky would have been about 7 also. Her and my brother Mike were the same age. Vicky's my first cousin. And we had been over to Grandma and Papa Hollen's house, Steve Hollen and Myrtle Hollen, and they decided, Uncle Johnny and Aunt Bess, my uncle and my dad's sister, my Aunt Bess, and my mama and my daddy decided to go to the Smokies. Well, we did not do vacations. We never went on vacations except for going to see relatives, to see Grandma and Papa over on Little Creek in Clay County. So we were just thrilled. We were so excited, and we went across the mountain, and we even went down into the Indian village, Cherokee Village, and saw the Cherokee Indians, and just now I have friends that call them the Wanabes, because Cherokees did not wear headdresses like that. But that's beside the point. And on the way down, we stopped here across the road from Cudjoe's Cavern. Cudjoe's Cave was a little store, and you could buy tickets. And so we all, Mom and Daddy and me and my brother Mike, who's 2.5 years younger than me, my cousin Vicky, my Uncle Johnny, and my Aunt Bess all bought tickets. And they brought us over and they led us through. And there was one point where the guide showed us, and he said, you know, the slave that escaped named Cudjoe, it's named for him because he came in here and he never came out. And the limestone, and this is not politically correct, but this is what we were told back then. So forgive me for that. But said the limestone, he stayed here and he stayed here and he fell asleep and he never woke up. And the limestone eventually covered him. And there was a big knob of limestone growth that a stalagmite that had been rounded off, and they said, and Cudjoe sat there until the limestone gathered over him, and this is him. And it's good luck to touch that as you go by. And you know what? My mama would not touch that. Aunt Bess box would not touch that. Daddy and Uncle Johnny did. Well, I touched it. I rubbed it all over, because I've never heard of such a thing as a person getting covered in limestone. So we went down from here and across the road, and we got us soda pop, 6 ounces, Coca-Colas, little Cokes. And oh, Lord of mercy, I'd never had anything tasted so good after going through that cold, cold cave as that soda pop. Because we didn't get, like most people back then, you know, that would have been, if I was 10 years old, that would have been 63. We didn't get soda pops all the time, maybe Kool-Aid occasionally, but not a Coca-Cola. And then we went over down into Cherokee, North Carolina. Went across from our side over to Cherokee, North Carolina to see the Native Americans. And you know, when we were down in Pigeon Forge, they had a bear. Oh, Lord of mercy. They had a bear in a pen, and you could buy a soda pop and give it to that bear, and that bear would put that up and drink your soda pop, and you could hand it to the feller, and the feller would give it to the bear. I got a Yahoo and gave it to the man, and the bear drank it, and it just amazed me. I didn't know bears like soda pop, but apparently they do, because that bear, I stood there and watched him drink 4 or 5 or 6. Now these days, the bear's not there anymore. It was a glass bar. And Mama and Aunt Bess, I remember they bought some kind of glass souvenir in there of Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge or something, and took it home with them. And we went over, and me and my brother Mike and my cousin Vicky climbed up on a fake dinosaur and had our picture taken on the dinosaur. And then we got to stand by the big chief himself. He must have had 7,000 eagle feathers on his big, long headdress. And we just knew he was somebody. Just wasn't Cherokee. And then we went down into the Cherokee village where they talked to us and they showed us the real stuff and explained to us that Plains Indians apparently wore those headdresses and Cherokees never did. And I liked that better because on Mama's side, my mama told us as we were driving that her grandma, my great-grandma, whose name was Fanny Breeden, B-R-E-E-D-E-N, was part Choctaw and Cherokee. Little short woman, and you know, my mama had a lot of problems with depression. And she was quiet for a minute, and she said, you know, when I was a little girl, everybody made fun of my grandma because she was part Indian. And when we'd get ready to go to town, my grandma would get face powder, and she would powder her face, and she'd wear gloves, and she'd wear a bonnet. And if her wrists showed, if her sleeves were too short, she would powder her sleeves. And her wrists, rather, not her sleeves, because she was ashamed that she had red skin. And my mama was quiet for another minute and kind of sniffed a little bit, like she had a few tears in her eyes, and she said, and sometimes when she didn't have face powder, she would use her powder puff and put a little bit of flour down and put that powder puff in the flour and powder her face. And when she would go into town, they would say, now, Aunt Fanny, don't try none of your Indian tricks on us. That wasn't that long ago. Don't try any of your Indian tricks on us. She wasn't full-blooded Choctaw and Cherokee. She was half Indian, as they said back then. And Mama talked about that, and she talked about how much she loved her grandma, my great-grandma. She said sometimes the powder was so thick as they walked, she would commence to sweating a little bit, and the powder would cake up in the wrinkles in her face. And they'd say, Grandma, you got too much powder on. And they would take their hankies out of their pockets, and they would get them wet with their tongue and a little bit of spit, and they would wipe it off. And if their grandma thought they wiped too much off, she'd make them go home with her. And she would look in the mirror, she would wash her face off, and she'd reapply either the face powder or when she didn't have that, the flour. So when I was going through Cudjoe's cave, and they were telling the story, and my mama told me that, you know, as we were riding home, I was just as proud as anything that those 2 escaped slaves got away, because it weren't right. It weren't right. And I said to myself, I'm just as proud as punch that they got away. Now, again, it was a fictional story, but when you're 10 years old, you don't much care.